On the night of the 31st of March, 1922, 6 people were killed on an isolated Bavarian farmstead called Hinterkaifeck. The farm stood at the end of a single dirt track about 70 kilometers north of Munich. The dead were 3 generations of one family and the maid who had arrived that afternoon. Their bodies were not found for almost 4 days. The killer remained on the property the entire time. 104 years later, the Bavarian state has named no one in print. The case will not be prosecuted. The question outlives the fact. 6 dead, 1 house, 104 years. This channel is called Quiet Radio. This is the case of the house at Hinterkaifeck. Andreas Gruber, 63, his wife Cäzilia, 72, their widowed daughter Viktoria Gabriel, 35, Victoria's children Cäzilia, ages 7, Josef, age 2, and the new maid Maria Baumgartner, 44, who had been at the farmstead for less than 12 hours. All 6 were killed with a single weapon, Bavarian farm mattock called a rifle. 4 of them in the barn, 2 of them in the house under one roof, the same building. And then a man slept in the kitchen for 3 days. Chapter 1, Hinterkaifeck. The name is administrative more than poetic, Bavarian, German. Hinter means simply behind. The farm took its name from sitting behind, that is, north of the older settlement of Kaifeck. It stood at the end of a single dirt track, about a mile north of the small hamlet of Kaifeck, 70 kilometers north of Munich, in the parish of Einödhof, in the district of Schrobenhausen, in Upper Bavaria. The nearest neighbor was 350 meters away, across an open field and a small wooded belt, the farm of Lorenz Schlittenbauer in Gruber. The building was a Bavarian Einödhof, the standard architectural form of the isolated single-family farm. In that part of Upper Bavaria, house, stable and barn combined under one continuous roof, 3 functional spaces separated only by interior walls and doors. The dwelling part of the structure faced the barn and stable extended to the rear. Crucially, for what would happen and how it would be discovered, the attic of the whole building was a single open loft, accessible by ladder from both the residential side and the barn side. There was no internal partition above the ceiling line. Anyone in the attic was, in principle, above any room in the house or any stall in the stable. The farm was built around 1863. Andreas Gruber bought it in the early of the 20th century. He ran it as a small mixed agricultural property, dairy cattle, some grain, an orchard, the usual outbuildings. He was known in Einödhof as frugal, to the point of being miserly. He was rumored to keep cash hidden somewhere on the property. After the murders, The searches turned up small sums in several places, but no central heart. Nothing was missing in any amount that would have made the robbery a plausible motive on its own. 5 photographs of survive. They are held in the Staatsarchiv München under the holdings of the Chapter 2, the Gruber Family. The household at the time of the murders was 4 adults and 2 children, and the maid who arrived on the day, Andreas Gruber, was 63. He had worked the farm for more than 30 years. He had the reputation in the village of being harsh, quick-tempered, difficult. His wife Cäzilia, known in the family by the diminutive Silly, was 72 and frail. Their daughter Viktoria Gabriel was 35, widowed since 1914. She had been married in March of that year to Karl Gabriel Voidhofen. Ownership of Hinterkaifeck. Karl was called up to the army at the outbreak of the First World War a few months later. He was reported killed on the 12th of December 1914 at the Battle of Arras on the Western Front. 2 soldiers from his unit testified that they had identified his body in the field, Josef, Bichler, Nikolaus, Haas. The body was not recovered, which was the usual situation on the Western Front, and not. The marriage had produced 1 child, Cäzilia, born in 1915, just over 9 months after the wedding. A daughter who would die at the age of 7 in the barn at Hinterkaifeck. There is a documented fact about this family that every account of the case eventually has to address. In 1915, Andreas Gruber and his daughter Viktoria were jointly convicted at the Neuburg District Court of an incestuous relationship between 1907 and 1910 during Viktoria's late teens and early 20s before her marriage to Karl. Andreas received a 1-year prison sentence. Viktoria received 1 month. The conviction is documented court record. After Karl Gabriel's death at Arras, Viktoria continued to live in her father's house. The family was effectively isolated from the village. It is one of the reasons no one came to the farmstead for days after the night of the 31st of March. Chapter 3. The children all died. The household contained 2 children at the time of the murders. Cäzilia Gabriel, the 7-year-old, Viktoria's daughter from her marriage to Karl Gabriel, and Josef, 2 years old at the time of the murders. Josef was Viktoria's son. His paternity is one of the documented and unresolved facts of the case. When Josef was born in 1919, Viktoria told her neighbor Lorenz Schuttenbauer, had been her lover, that the child had in fact been conceived through her father's continuing abuse. Schlittenbauer briefly withdrew his acknowledgement of paternity, then under pressure from Andreas Gruber, reasserted it. He agreed in a separate civil action to support the child and was registered for legal and parish purposes as Josef's father. The boy's biological paternity was never resolved during the lifetimes of any of the people who could have known. It is one of the dark facts the case sits on top of, and one of the reasons every theory of the murders eventually has to address the question of who, at the end of 1921, had caused to one Andreas Gruber dead. Chapter 4: The Maid Problem. Maria Baumgartner was 44 years old. She came from a family in the village of Eberstetten, also in Upper Bavaria. She was not previously known to the Gruber household. She was hired in the early spring of 1922 to replace the previous maid, Crescens Rieger. Rieger had quit some 6 months earlier, by some accounts, in the autumn of 1921, saying she could no longer stand the noises in the attic. She later told police that she had heard footsteps overhead at night for several weeks before she left, and that the household animals, particularly the dog, had behaved strangely. The Grubers were without a maid through the winter. Maria Baumgartner was escorted to Hinterkaifeck by her sister on the afternoon of Friday, the 31st of March, 1922. The sister stayed only briefly and then walked back along the track. She was almost certainly the last person outside the household to see any of the inhabitants of Hinterkaifeck alive. Maria slept that night in the small bedchamber of the kitchen that the maid traditionally used. She had been at the farm for less than 12 hours when she was killed. Chapter 5: The weeks before the reports of strange events at Hinterkaifeck in the weeks before the murders are not folklore. They appear in the police interviews conducted in the first week of April 1922. Andreas Gruber had spoken about them to neighbors in the village in the days immediately before he died. In late March, perhaps a week before the murders, he found tracks in fresh snow, leading from the edge of the forest to the door of the small machine room at the rear of the farm. There were no return tracks. The lock had been broken. He told at least 3 people in the village about it. On the same night, or possibly the night following, the family heard footsteps in the attic above the residence. Andreas went up the ladder with a lamp and found nothing. The footsteps were heard again on at least one subsequent night. A house key went missing in roughly the same period. The front door key on most readings. It was not found again before the murders. In the first week of March, Andreas found a newspaper in the farm that he had not bought. Was inquiries at the village post office established that none of the surrounding farms received a copy that could have been left at Hinterkaifeck by mistake. Where it had come from was never established. The family dog barked repeatedly at the attic and at the machine room through several nights in late March. Chapter 6: The night of 31st of March. None of the strange reports had been filed with the Landgendarmerie for the murder. Andreas Gruber spoke about them in the village. He did not consider them serious enough to make a formal complaint. The cumulative testimony from his neighbors, taken in the first weeks of April, established that someone had probably been on the property at intervals for at least the second half of March. Whether that someone was the eventual killer or whether the killer was already in the house before the family arrived home from market on the afternoon of the 31st is one of the questions on which 104 years of investigation have been able to converge. And what is reconstructible is this. On the night of the 31st of March, the four older members of the family went out to the barn for reasons that have never been established. Andreas, Cäzilia, Viktoria, and the 7-year-old Viktoria Gabriel. They were killed there, one after another, with heavy crushing blows to the head from the roof of the Bavarian mattock, with a broad horizontal blade on one side of the head and a narrow pick on the other, used in the district for breaking ground and grubbing roots, common on every farm in the parish. Victoria's skull showed at least 9 star-shaped impact wounds. Andreas' skull was largely destroyed. The little girl, Cäzilia Gabriel, did not die at once. The autopsy found that she had survived for some hours after the blow. Lying in the barn, her hair was torn out in tufts beside her body, the marks of her own hands in her final agony. Then the killer went into the dwelling. He killed the maid, Maria Baumgartner, in her bed, in her night clothes, almost certainly without waking. And in the main bedroom, in his bassinet, the 2-year-old Josef, killed where he slept. Chapter 7: The Killer Who Stayed. This is the documented fact that gives the case its singular quality in the literature, and it is documented, not folklore. When the police arrived on the evening of the 4th of April, the cattle in the stable were healthy. They had been fed and milked recently, and breakfast had been eaten in the kitchen. The bread supply in the pantry was effectively gone. Meat had been cut from the larder. The kitchen oven had been used. A neighbor, the artisan Michael Placol, later testified that on the night of Sunday, the 2nd of April, he had seen smoke rising from the chimney of Hinterkaifeck. As he passed along the edge of the forest, when he approached to investigate, a person came out of the house holding a lantern and aimed the lantern's light directly into his face so that he could not see who held it. Placol noted that the smoke had what he called a revolting smell. The artisan went on his way. The contents of the kitchen oven were never examined. The collected facts of the residential occupation after the murders established that someone, almost certainly the killer, remained on the property on the night of the 31st of March until some point on the 3rd or 4th of April. He left in the hours before the search party arrived. He took nothing of value, and he left the weapon in the attic. Chapter 8, Discovery, the 4th of April. The murders were not discovered for almost 4 days. The signal that something was wrong came from the village school. The 7-year-old Cäzilia Gabriel did not arrive at her classroom on the morning of Saturday, the 1st of April. Her teacher noted the absence, but as it was a Saturday, the school week was nearly over. She did not yet act on it. On Sunday, the 2nd of April, the family did not appear at Mass in Einödhof. The Grubers were not devout in any showy way, but they were regular Sunday churchgoers. The priest later said in his statement that he had registered the absence, but assumed they were ill or that the weather had kept them at home. On Monday, the 3rd of April, Cäzilia Gabriel did not return to school. Her absence now amounted to 2 consecutive school days without notice. On the afternoon of Tuesday, the 4th of April, the village mechanic, Albert Hoffner, walked up the forest track to the farm. He had a standing appointment to repair an engine at Hinterkaifeck that day. He arrived in the early afternoon. He found the courtyard empty. He waited for nearly an hour, calling out, walking around the outside of the buildings. When no one came, he set to work on the engine. He worked alone in the machine room for about 4.5 hours. He noticed nothing unusual. Around 3 o'clock, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor from Gruber, sent his 16-year-old son, Johann, and his 9-year-old stepson, Josef Dick, to walk over to Hinterkaifeck. They returned to say they had not been able to find anyone. Shortly after 3:30, Schlittenbauer himself went over, accompanied by 2 Gruber neighbors, Michael Pearl, Jakob Siegel, and the 2 boys. They reached the farmstead and found the residential doors locked. Schlittenbauer led them to the rear. The door to the machine room, the same door whose lock Andreas had reported broken a week earlier, was standing open. Chapter 9, the Landgendarmerie and the skulls. They went through the machine room, into the stable, from the stable into the barn. 4 bodies lay in the barn, under a covering of straw and hay. Pearl and Siegel backed out into the courtyard, badly shocked. Schlittenbauer went on alone, walked through the interior passage that connected the barn to the dwelling, unlocked the front door from the inside with a key, the waitress said, although it was not clear who. He went into the bedchamber of the kitchen and into the bedroom of the residence. He found the 2 further bodies there. Then he came out, walked 3/4 of a mile back to Gruber, and arranged for word to be sent to the Landgendarmerie and the local doctor. The first uniformed officer arrived in the evening. The bodies were not removed until the morning of the 5th. The case was assigned to Inspector Georg Gruber of the Munich Landgendarmerie. Gruber's team conducted somewhere over 100 interviews in the first month. The investigation was hampered from the start between the discovery on the 4th and the arrival of any uniformed officer. Several local, by the standards of even 1922 forensics, no proper crime scene practice was followed. Fingerprints were not lifted. The blood spatter was not photographed in detail. 5 photographs of the scene survive, wide-angle views. There are no close-ups of any wound, no sketch of the body positions was made. The autopsies were performed by the court physician Dr. Johann Baptist Müller on the 5th of April on a long trestle table in the farm courtyard. The weapon was not at the scene on the 5th. The investigators searched the residence and the outbuildings without finding it. It was assumed to have been removed. It would not surface for nearly a year. When the farm was demolished in 1923, the workmen brought down a roof from the attic, dried blood still on the head. It had been concealed in the loft above the residence, above the very rooms in which 2 of the dead had been killed. The single open attic that spanned both halves of the building had served as the killer's storage place. In 1923, with the case stalled, the Munich Landgendarmerie agreed to a course of action. The bodies of 4 of the 6 victims were exhumed from the family plot at Einödhof. The 4 older victims found in the barn, they were decapitated, and the 4 skulls were sent to. There they were turned over to a clairvoyant. The case files referred to a Helsehern, a female seer, the aim, as stated in the contemporary correspondence, was that the medium might glean from the skull some impression of the killer's face. Chapter 10. The Suspect Chronology. The medium examined the skulls. She produced no useful identification. The skulls were retained in storage by the Munich police. They were lost to the Second World War. The most commonly given account is that they were destroyed in the air raids on Munich between 1943 and 1945. They have never been recovered. The 4 headless bodies remain in their plot at Einödhof. This is one of the most chilling and the most awkward facts of the case, and it is the one most often misrepresented in modern coverage. The decapitation was not in any sense that a present-day forensic pathologist would recognize a criminal investigative measure. It was a spiritualist consultation undertaken in 1923 by a serving police agency. Across 104 years, the rolling investigation has had a small number of named suspects. Each appears in the file. None has ever been proved. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor from Gruber, 1874 to 1941, remains the strongest of the early suspects on circumstantial grounds. He had entered the barn first and had walked through the interior of the house alone before the others were let in. He had opened the front door from the inside with a key whose origin he could. He was, in the literal Bavarian phrase the investigators used, so ruhig dabei, too calm with it. He never confessed. He was never charged. He sued in civil court almost everyone who called him the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. He won. He died at his farm in Gruber on the 22nd of May 1941 at the age of 66. Carl Gabriel, Victoria's first husband, declared killed at Arras in December 1914, is the subject of one of the case's most persistent popular, that his death had been falsely reported, that he had survived under another identity, and that he had returned to Hinterkaifeck in 1922. Two soldiers from his unit, Josef and Nikolaus Haas, testified that they had identified his body in the field. The Carl returned theory is not supported by any document in the case file. Adolf Gump appears on the suspect list as early as the 9th of April 1922. He was associated with the far-right Freikorps Sutherland. The case against the Gump brothers was discontinued in 1954. Peter Weber was named in a separate line of inquiry by his former workmate Josef. Betz Weber was interrogated and could not be tied to the scene. Other names appear in the file. None of them ever produced an arrest, and both the last formal interrogations were carried out in 1986 by Detective Chief Superintendent Konrad Pollard. Before his retirement, they did not produce a charge. Chapter 11, the Academy, and the files. The case had been officially closed by the Bavarian State Prosecutor's Office in 1955. All the named suspects who could still be questioned had been questioned. The file had been with the prosecutor for 30 years. Closure was procedural. It did not mean the file was destroyed. The file was deposited with the Munich and Augsburg State Archives. The police side material to Munich, Police Direction Mention 8091b. The prosecutorial material to Augsburg, Deutsche. The case was available there for any later officer who wished to look. The first serious reopening was Müller-Thomann's, completed in 1986. He took the late testimony, interrogated the remaining surviving witnesses, by then very few, and concluded that the case could not be solved on the evidence available. The second reopening was in 2007 at the Bayerische Polizeischule at Fürstenfeldbruck. 15 cadets working under the supervision of their criminal investigation instructors were given the Hinterkaifeck file as a closed case exercise. A cold case review using modern forensic and criminological methodology. They had access to the full state archive file material. They worked over their final report, made 2 methodological findings and 1 substantive finding. The cadets, working independently of each other on the file, had converged on a single most likely suspect. They named that suspect to their supervising staff. They did not name the suspect publicly. The reason given was that descendants of the suspect were still living in the area, and the evidence was below the criminal-procedural threshold required for any charge. The report stated only that conclusion was unanimous, and that the suspect had been one of the historically named figures in the case. The implication that the named suspect was Lorenz Schlittenbauer is widespread in the secondary literature, but the Academy's own report does not say so in print, and Schlittenbauer's descendants in Gruber have never been formally accused. What has been called in popular accounts the 2017 declassification of the Hinterkaifeck file is on natural examination, not a single event. The file has been physically present and notionally accessible at the Staatsarchiv München and the Staatsarchiv Augsburg since the original closure in 1955. The files have been open to researchers under standard archival registration since then. What changed in the period around 2017 was that a private initiative organized through the Hinterkaifeck.net forum, a German language community of researchers and amateurs which have been active since the early 2000s, pulled necessary to obtain 344 pages of the most important file excerpts in scanned form and to publish them online for inspection, together with running commentary and a wiki. This was not a state declassification act. It was a private digitization under. It nevertheless represents the most important shift in public access to the case file in 50 years. It is the basis on which most of the recent secondary literature, journalistic, podcast, and documentary work has been produced. The phrase declassified in 2017 is a popular shorthand for it. It is not strictly accurate. Peter Leuschner has published a standard German monograph on the case through multiple editions from 1978 to 2023. Andrea Maria Schenkel's novel Tanud, published in 2006, is a fictionalized account transposed to a slightly different region and renamed. It sold more than 1 million copies in German, was translated into more than 20 languages, and was adapted into a feature film in 2009. The case has been covered in German language broadcasting at regular intervals. The international Amazon series Lore dedicated an episode to it in 2018. The German language treatments have been more careful with the file material. The English language treatments have tended towards sensationalism and the persistent error that the killer. The Bavarian Police Academy at Fürstenfeldbruck has not, in any subsequent publication, named the suspect identified in 2007. The file as it stands is the file as it stood at Chapter 12, the question. 104 years on, the Bavarian state has, in effect, said two things about Hinterkaifeck. The first is that murders were almost certainly committed by a person known to the family. A person who could enter the property, who could move through the unified residence and barn structure without losing his way in the dark. who could wait in the attic for the household to come home, who could, after killing 6 people in the space of perhaps an hour, sleep and eat in the residence for 3 days. The second is that the state cannot proceed. The evidence is below the criminal-procedural threshold. The named suspect, whoever he is in the Academy's internal report, died. And on every defamation suit he ever brought, the state will not. In 2026, name him. There is no living victim. The 6 who died at Hinterkaifeck have been in the ground at Einödhof for 104 years. 4 of them by the catastrophic decision of 1923, without their head. The 7-year-old Cäzilia, who lay alive in the barn for hours with her hair in her hands, has no surviving sibling to outlive her. Viktoria Gabriel left no descendant beyond the 2-year-old Josef. In the bassinet, the line ended in the barn and the bedchamber. What the case asks in its present form is a question about what the institutional record owes the dead. When the documentation supports a conclusion, the law cannot reach. The Bavarian state has not, in 2026, answered it. The Academy at Fürstenfeldbruck has not published the name. The family is gone. The question of this channel is called the Quiet Hill Doctrine. We come back to the things people did and the silences that grew around them. Subscribe and the next one will find you. Until then, keep them in mind. 6 dead at Hinterkaifeck, 104 years, and the name the state has not put in print.